What are you talking about? You know my name. Look up the number. As you probably know, Get Back is making its home media debut. You can get a fancy 3-disc Blu-ray set with collector's cards and all sorts of other awesome trinkets. But before I purchase my Get Back, I figured it'd be nice to take a look at some other Beatles home media releases. And being a big VHS guy, I thought what better to do than look at some of the weird oddities and novelties that popped up on VHS, and more importantly to talk about what the future might hold for the final Beatles theatrical film. More on that later, of course. So, when talking about the Beatles, we gotta mention their movies, and most people say there are 5 major Beatles films. A Hard Day's Night from 1964. This is the Criterion DVD. Help from 1965. It's a nice Blu-ray version. The television film Magical Mystery Tour from 1967. One of the few major failures of their career. The cartoon classic Yellow Submarine from 1968. There is a nicer version available, but I still have it just on VHS. And the one that we'll get back to later today, literally, get back, Let It Be. So we're going to let it be for now, get back to it later. Alright. But there are lots of other weird Beatles home media doodads laying around. I thought, let's take a look at some of those. So we'll start with something that's not super obscure, but it's weird in its own way. Here is from Good Times Home Entertainment there, the Beatles Unauthorized. This really isn't a documentary. It was marketed as such, and I believe it did make it to DVD. DVDs have popped up on Amazon, but this is an excuse to release some Beatles material that Good Times was able to license. Good Times, they're known today for a lot of feature film releases, usually like public domain or like cheaper stuff. I have some of their Three Stooges VHS tapes. They did a lot of cartoons as well. So this video here takes their Washington, D.C. performance from 1964. It takes a special interview from 1966, and also some tracks from the Hollywood Bowl. The 1964 concert performance is like the big draw. The audio and picture quality aren't very good, but it's awesome to see the Beatles playing for the first time in the United States. The audience is just going berserk. Both the girls and the boys in the audience are just getting carried away and jamming out, bobbing around as the Beatles are playing. So that's a lot of fun to watch. The Hollywood Bowl footage is in really bad shape, both audio and picture-wise, and there's only a couple tracks from it, and those were also on the first performance, the Washington performance, so really nothing there. And then the interview is interesting too. It's the famous interview where they talk about songs like Norwegian Wood, and the famous quote about, we just wanted to write songs about prostitutes and lesbians, that sort of thing. There's some interesting questions from the reporter audience there, of course, like the one man who's adamant to ask the Beatles how much they make and how they pay their taxes, and the four are just sitting there looking at this guy with the blankest expressions on their faces because A, that's none of his business, and B, why would you ask somebody something like that so abruptly? I don't know. And they didn't handle it anyway. They even say, hey, that's not our job. So you gotta think about that kind of thing. There's a couple other little bits on here too that aren't marketed on the box. Notably, Pete Best's appearance on the TV game show I've Got a Secret, where Pete Best is asked, you know, well, why'd you leave your job with the Beatles and whatnot? It's a very awkward interview, or not interview really, I guess a very awkward program. And he spends a lot of time looking very confused and perplexed. But he's a good sport about it, and so for some reason Pete says that he quit the Beatles to form his own band, which is a different story than most of us hear. Most of us hear how Pete Best was discharged, so I don't know, figure that out. But some interesting stuff on here, nothing of great substance, a few classic songs. I mean, for what it is, just kind of a cheapo hodgepodge of Beatles stuff. You could do a lot worse. So let's talk a lot worse. From Scimitar Home Entertainment comes The Beatles, The Legend Continues. On both the front and back of the package is a large disclaimer reading, neither the Beatles nor Apple Corps Limited have authorized the sale, production, or release of this video. consumers should not confuse this product with authorized Beatles product. So when the video you purchase about the Beatles says it does not endorse or is not authorized by the Beatles in any way, you know you're in for a good time. This is a 45-minute documentary film. As far as I know, it never got to DVD or any other form of home media. It tries to encapsulate their whole career from beginning to end in 45 minutes, which is a pretty difficult feat. There are some things that really annoy me about it. The most conspicuous one being there's no actual Beatles music in this. They probably couldn't get the licenses they needed to use it. So instead we get very generic, I don't even think they're songs, it's more like just public domain guitar riffs and drum riffs that sound kind of rock and roll-ish. It's very cheap, very shoddy. And there's a lot of things that they focus on for so long they have to skip over other parts. For example, I'd say at least a fifth of the running time is them talking about the Hard Day's Night movie. And while, yes, A Hard Day's Night is very important to the Beatles' history, with only about 45 minutes to work with, you can't really spend a whole lot of time on one thing. There's also a big segment about Jimmy Nicol. Pete Best is not mentioned. His picture is shown, but they just kind of skip by him. But Jimmy Nicol, they show a lot of photos of him. He was a temporary fill-in for Ringo when Ringo was too ill to perform in one of their tours in the mid-60s. And they showed an interview with him, a lot of photos and stuff. That was interesting. And there's a lot of time spent talking about John Lennon's post-Beatle career and the end of his Beatle time, a lot of the stuff with the Ballad of John and Yoko, those sorts of things. A lot of time spent on that, and the film ends talking about the Beatles' then current career. This is from 1996, so only John was deceased, and it's mentioned that John was killed by a crazed ex-Beatle fan, which I thought was a strange way to describe Mark David Chapman. I don't know what the story is there exactly. Yeah, but it tends to kind of gloss over a lot of things. Almost all the other films besides Hard Day's Night are just very quickly glossed over. Abbey Road, of all things, they speed through. Not really a very effective storytelling. Some interesting stuff there. Surprisingly, they also have a lot of mean things to say about Linda McCartney, how she contributed to breaking up the band. What's usually, the anger that's usually reserved for Yoko Ono is projected onto her. I don't know, it's a strange video. Something very different. One that more Beatles fans will recognize. And silly me, when I made my MGM Big Box video, which is one of the most popular VHS videos I've made on this channel, I completely forgot I had this. I've had this for years. I bought it for about $1 at a thrift store. Box is in tatters, but it's still very interesting. The Complete Beatles, released in the early 80s. Malcolm McDowell narrates a 2-hour documentary about the history of the band. And this is generally considered one of the best sort of, I guess, resources, biographical products about the Beatles. There's a big song list here. I don't know how well it's going to show up because the font's so tiny. But big list of all the songs they use, both Beatles songs and others. Usually the big draw, and the reason why people remember this, is for all the interviews. So many fellow musicians, people who influenced or were influenced by the Beatles, speak out about different things. And what the band means to them and that kind of thing. And that's really nice. Bruce Johnston of the Beach Boys being one of the ones who was interviewed. And it's very comprehensive. At 2 hours, it covers just about everything. Unlike that last video where some things are dwelled on, others are glossed over. This is pretty thorough. Sometimes it gets a little draggy in places, but for the most part, very well made, very informative. In the early 90s, Paul McCartney purchased the rights to this video, so it could never be seen again, because everybody was starting to work on the Beatles anthology. Here are the 3 CD sets. Of course, there's a documentary and other things that went with this. It was a whole big campaign. But he felt that now that they were making a new thing for the anthology set, that the Complete Beatles was really unnecessary. And apparently, most people believe Sir Paul never wants this to be released or even really seen again, that there are better, newer, more comprehensive packages available. But I'm really glad I have it. It's actually a really nice documentary film. pieces of it are on YouTube. I don't think the thing in its entirety is. When I searched this morning, I could only find some excerpts. But if you find an old video like I did laying around the thrift store, go for it. So there's three kind of more obscure things. So let's talk about the elephant in the room. When someone says Beatles on VHS, we gotta talk about Let It Be. Let it be. Let it be. Let it be. What could be the answer to the conundrum that is Let It Be? You know, this is, I believe, the newest home video release of Let It Be. This is from about 1981 or 82. It's actually licensed through Magnetic Video. The Magnetic videotapes that I have, don't put actual magnets next to your videos. The Magnetic Company tapes that I have date back to like the late 70s, early 80s. They were one of the first big producers of movies on VHS. And sometime I'll do a video where I go through my collection. I don't have a ton, but I have a few that are really interesting. So, Let It Be. Now, with Get Back coming out, which is 8 hours long, with restored footage, you know, the whole saga of the last couple Beatles albums being made, is Let It Be even worth watching? I say yes, because Let It Be in some ways plays like a very condensed form of Get Back. Let It Be is only about 80 minutes. Get Back is 8 hours. So Let It Be is just, you know, kind of highlights and lowlights, I guess you could say. Now I have to argue too, Let It Be gets a really bad rap, and there are so many reviews online that say things like, oh, it's not the making of an album, it's the breakup of a band. That's not really the case. Let It Be is a pretty impersonal film, I think. Mostly because it never dwells on anything for very long. With 80 minutes to work with, it clips from one thing to the next. There are some moments of great happiness, such as John and Paul duetting on Two of Us for the first time. You know, there's some little gags and jokes in there. And the group jamming on the song Susie Parker and just having a great time. And there are some moments of tension, of course. Every review notes how George and Paul get in a little passive-aggressive tiff about George's playing and whatnot. John Lennon looks like he's so bored in a few scenes he wants to go bash his head off the wall. And, you know, that's true, but at the same time, the movie doesn't dwell on that. We go from one thing to the next, to the next, to the next. Really, the main arc here is listening to these songs evolve from demos or from practice sessions into the real thing. Notably songs like I've Got a Feeling and Don't Let Me Down and Two of Us that kind of pop up throughout the movie a few times. So that's kind of the big draw. So I think Let It Be is important, and I don't think it's as big and scary as a lot of people make it out to be. It's an interesting, you know, fly-on-the-wall perspective, as it's often described. Just watching the Beatles work, just watching them make music and, you know, show off their talents and things like that. There have been many instances in the past where Let It Be has almost gotten a DVD or Blu-ray or even updated VHS, let's be honest, this is old even by VHS standards, has almost gotten an updated release, notably again with the anthology stuff. We'll hold up the third volume here. Some of the footage was restored for the anthology documentary. And there was talk when Let It Be Naked came out there. This was the remix of that album. But that stuff just never materialized. A lot of the Beatles themselves, or I should say a lot of, I think all of them, really didn't like Let It Be. And they can contextualize it better than we can. This was a tough time for them, but there are moments of happiness to be had. Let It Be is still worth watching. When Get Back was announced, a restored form of Let It Be was promised as one of the bonuses or one of the extras or whatnot. That has yet to materialize. As far as I know, none of the new Get Back releases, the DVD, the Blu-ray, anything else, have Let It Be. So this is still stuck on, you know, vintage home media. I think you can get on Laserdisc or VHS. So yeah, just keep that one in mind. You know, don't go in expecting to see this as one of the secondary features or anything like that. I think someday it probably will. You know, Michael Lindsay Hogg talked about, the director of Let It Be, talked about how it wasn't quite his vision, and he doesn't care if the Beatles like it or not. You know, it was his movie, and I guess it was done, at least somewhat done anyway, his way. So, food for thought. Next time we talk Beatles, I will unbox and get back the Blu-ray set, and we'll talk about the collector's cards and some of the little things that pop up there. But for now, just some weird Beatles food for thought, just to, you know, keep you thinking. And in the meantime, my friends, I hope you enjoyed this little foray into Beatles land in a different part of the TV room today. And please comment below with any thoughts on Let It Be or Get Back or any of the other Beatles films, or if you know of any weird, bizarre, not practical pieces of Beatles media, please comment those below too. And until next time, my friends, go out and see If She Loves You. Yeah, yeah, yeah.